I do my best. I do what I can, and just if I see an opening, I think it's important that I go for it.
Miami Open hasn't even played its opening match yet, and it's already the most contentious tennis tournament of 2026. Just days ago, Alexandra Yala wrapped up her Indian Wells campaign, positioned at number 28 inches the world, with Philippine flags flooding the California desert and a supporter base so enormous that her practice sessions drew audiences rivaling Carlos Alcaraz. The WTA's own social media crew called her a phenomenon. Tournament executives said they were enjoying every minute of it. So, imagine the shockwave when word spread that the same Philippine flags that have been electrifying tennis venues across the globe are now reportedly being prohibited from the stands at the very tournament that made Yala a recognizable name. Miami over concerns about audience noise. Tennis analysts didn't just raise eyebrows, they completely lost it. And honestly, the reaction makes total sense once you examine what's actually unfolding here, because this story is far more layered, far more political, and far more revealing about where professional tennis currently stands than any headline can capture. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now because this is precisely the kind of story we break down differently here. Let's get into it. To understand why this situation has sparked such fierce debate, you need to go back to January 2026, specifically to Court 6 at Melbourne Park, where the Australian Open made a scheduling decision that still has people talking. Yala was assigned to one of the smaller courts for her main draw debut. Court 6 holds roughly 1,000 spectators. What showed up outside was something closer to a national celebration. Lines stretched back toward Rod Laver Arena. Hundreds of Filipino supporters, many of whom had traveled specifically for this occasion, never made it inside. Those who did packed every available inch of space from the baseline ledge to the courtside bar, and they were vocal genuinely, unapologetically vocal. Tennis journalist Jose Morgado captured the broader sentiment when he simply stated, "Putting Yala on Court 6 is just foolish." Philippine tennis coach Santa Maria went further, pointing out that tournament organizers had no excuse for being caught off guard. Yala's practice sessions days earlier had already been mobbed. The signs were obvious. The preparation wasn't there. But here's where it gets more complicated, because the crowd noise issue at the Australian Open wasn't just about volume. Filipino supporters were called out by the chair umpire multiple times during rallies. Yala's opponent, Alicia Parks, who dropped the first set 6-0 before staging a remarkable comeback, openly admitted the atmosphere had rattled her. She said it was extremely difficult, that she was so fixated on the crowd in the first set that her game completely fell apart because of it. That triggered a genuine etiquette debate. Some argued the Filipino supporters were simply passionate newcomers to a sport with unusual silence rules, pointing out that tennis culture demands quiet during play in a way that soccer, basketball, and boxing absolutely do not. Others were more critical, using words like disrespectful and classless. One voice from the Filipino community pushed back directly, questioning why local standards should override how an entirely different culture expresses joy. Santa Maria's perspective was probably the most candid. Filipino tennis fans are still in their early stages. The country's sporting pulse has always been basketball and boxing. Tennis was never the vehicle through which the Philippines expressed itself on a global stage, until Yala changed that completely. So that's the foundation. A passionate, rapidly growing fan base, navigating unfamiliar sports etiquette in venues, clearly unprepared for the scale of their presence. Now bring that context to Miami. The 2026 Miami Open begins March 17th at Hard Rock Stadium. Yala enters as the number 32 seed, a position that would have been nearly unthinkable 12 months ago when she entered the same tournament as a wild card ranked 140th in the world. Back then, she defeated Jelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and Iga Swiatek in back-to-back straight-set victories before falling to Jessica Pegula in the semifinals. It was the run that built everything. The ranking points she accumulated during that 2-week stretch are now set to expire, which means Miami 2026 isn't just a return to familiar ground, it's a high-stakes pressure test, and the Filipino community in South Florida knows it. Miami-Dade County and the surrounding region carries a substantial Filipino-American population. The fan infrastructure that stunned Pegula last year, her own words were, "What on earth is going on? Where do these people come from?" is going to be even more organized, even more visible, and bringing those flags that have become the defining visual symbol of Yala's entire journey. Which brings us directly to the controversy at the heart of this discussion. Reports circulating within the tennis community suggest the Miami Open is considering or has signaled restrictions on flags in the stands, with crowd noise management cited as the justification. Now, Before the comment section fills up with absolute certainty in either direction, here is what the verified record actually shows, because precision matters in a story like this. What is documented is this: the Miami Open has a precedent for flag-related intervention. During the 2025 women's final between Aryna Sabalenka and Jessica Pegula, a small group of fans waving Belarusian flags were approached by tournament officials mid-match, escorted from their seats, and returned without the flags. Tennis journalist Ben Rothenberg, who was courtside and reported on it directly, noted that the Miami Open's published ticket policies at the time made no explicit mention of prohibited flags. The intervention happened regardless. The context behind that specific decision was rooted in the broader tennis governing body's 2022 ruling that removed Belarusian and Russian flags from all official tournament displays, following Belarus's role in the invasion of Ukraine. That ruling was primarily aimed at scoreboards, broadcasts, and graphics, not spectator behavior, but Miami enforced it on fans anyway. So the tournament has already demonstrated both the willingness and the operational capacity to remove flags from its stands during live matches. That is not speculation. That is documented. What is now being debated, and what has tennis analysts reacting so strongly, is whether that same mechanism gets applied to Philippine flags on entirely different grounds. Not geopolitical conflict, not a war, but noise. And that is where the outrage is completely legitimate. Djokovic called the Yala fanbase a welcome challenge to have. Andy Roddick said it was exactly the kind of story tennis should be celebrating. The BNP Paribas Open's Philippe Dor told Front Office Sports they were loving every minute of it, actively promoting it, and benefiting from it commercially. The WTA posted her day-in-the-life content at Indian Wells, which became the most-watched video the tournament produced all year. Not close, not even debatable. Every institutional voice in professional tennis has spent the better part of 12 months applauding what this fan base represents. New audiences, new markets, new energy in a sport that has historically struggled to break through in large portions of Asia and the broader Filipino diaspora. To then turn around and use crowd noise as the basis for restricting the most visible symbol of that same fan base, the flag of the Philippines would represent a contradiction so glaring that it almost defies explanation, and tennis analysts aren't staying quiet about it. The reaction across the community has been sharp, pointed, and in several cases, genuinely furious. The argument being made by those pushing back hardest goes something like this: if you are going to welcome a new audience into your sport, if you are going to build commercial campaigns around their enthusiasm and feature their faces on your social channels and sell out your outer courts because of them, you do not then penalize them for expressing national identity in the most fundamental way possible by holding a flag. There is also a cultural dimension here that deserves serious consideration. The Filipino diaspora is one of the largest in the world. Over 10 million Filipinos reside outside the Philippines. Approximately 1.7 million are in California alone. The Miami metropolitan area carries its own substantial Filipino-American community. For many of these supporters, following Yala isn't casual sports entertainment. It is something closer to a collective act of visibility. A diaspora that has spent decades present but largely invisible in elite global sport, suddenly seeing itself reflected at the highest level. One commentator described it precisely: when Filipinos show up loudly at tennis tournaments, the reaction tends to get framed as disruption rather than devotion. The same energy that gets celebrated as electric atmosphere when it comes from certain crowds gets labeled a noise problem when it comes from others. That double standard, whether intentional or structural, is exactly what's fueling the intensity of this debate. Now, to be completely fair to the Miami Open, running a tournament of this magnitude comes with genuine logistical pressures. Crowd noise during live points does affect players. That is not a fabricated concern. Alicia Parks said directly that the Australian Open atmosphere nearly derailed her entire match. Tournament officials have a responsibility to every player in the draw, not just the one generating the most attention. Balancing that responsibility against the cultural significance of what Filipino fans bring is genuinely challenging. But there is a meaningful distinction between enforcing existing tennis etiquette, quiet during rallies, no cheering on opponent errors, and banning the flag of a nation from your stadium. One addresses behavior, the other targets identity. If the Miami Open crosses that line, it will not just generate negative press for a week. It will send a signal to an entirely new generation of tennis fans. Fans the sport desperately needs that their presence is welcome only on the sport's terms, stripped of the symbols that make it meaningful to them. Yala herself, for her part, has remained above the noise in the most literal sense. Her message heading into Miami was measured and grounded. She said it doesn't matter whether she wins the tournament or loses in the first round. She knows she's here, and she's here to stay. That is the kind of composure that has made her transcend the sport, and becomes something larger in the Filipino cultural conversation. The tournament begins in 3 days. The draw is set. Yala is seeded 32nd and receives a first-round bye, meaning her opening match will fall sometime in the middle of the first week. The crowds will come, the flags will come, and how the Miami Open handles what walks through those gates will reveal everything about what professional tennis actually values when commercial pressures and cultural politics arrive in the same building at the same time. This is the story, not just a flag, not just noise. A sport at a crossroads, deciding in real time whether its growing global audience gets to show up fully or gets managed into a version of itself that's more comfortable for the people already in the room. If this kind of in-depth coverage is what you're here for, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel covers tennis the way it actually deserves to be covered. We'll be tracking everything that unfolds at Miami as it happens. Don't miss it.